The blood on Sarah Martinez's scrubs was still wet when the sirens began wailing outside St. Mary's Hospital. She paused at the nurse's station, exhaustion weighing down her shoulders after another brutal 12-hour shift in the ICU. Her feet ached in shoes she couldn't afford to replace, and her mind was already racing ahead to picking up 8-year-old Emma from her neighbor's apartment. Multi-vehicle accident incoming, the emergency coordinator's voice crackled over the intercom. All available staff to Trauma Bay 1. Sarah should have been off the clock, should have been walking out those automatic doors to her beat-up Honda Civic with its overdue inspection sticker. Should have been thinking about helping Emma with her math homework and scraping together enough leftovers for dinner. Instead, she found herself running toward the chaos, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. The trauma bay erupted into controlled pandemonium as paramedics rushed in wheeling gurneys. Sarah counted at least 6 victims from what looked like a horrific pileup on Interstate 10. The smell of gasoline and blood filled the air as doctors and nurses swarmed around the casualties. "This one's in V-fib," shouted Dr. Chen from across the room. "Sarah, I need you here now!" She rushed to the gurney where a middle-aged man lay unconscious, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. His face was partially obscured by trauma, but something about his silver hair and prominent jaw seemed familiar. Sarah pushed the thought aside in moments like this. Every patient was just a human being fighting for their life. The heart monitor screamed its flatline alarm. No pulse, no breathing. "Starting compressions," Sarah announced, positioning herself over the patient's chest. Her hands locked together, arms straight, she began the rhythmic push that might be the difference between life and death. 1, 2, 3. The ribs gave slightly under her palms, normal for proper compression depth, but always unsettling. "Come on," she muttered under her breath. "Stay with me." Around her, the trauma team worked on other victims. A teenage girl with a fractured skull. An elderly man with internal bleeding. A woman clutching a baby who, miraculously, seemed unharmed. Every available doctor and nurse was occupied, stretched beyond their limits by the sudden influx of critical patients. Sarah continued compressions, sweat beading on her forehead. 30 compressions, then 2 rescue breaths. The man's skin had a grayish pallor that she'd seen too many times before. His lips were turning blue despite the oxygen mask. "Charging defib," called Dr. Chen, but he was still working on the teenage victim. "Sarah, you'll have to do it." She grabbed the defibrillator paddles, her movements precise despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Clear!" The man's body jerked as the electric shock coursed through him. The monitor continued its ominous flat line. More compressions, more breaths. Sarah's arms burned from the effort, but she refused to stop. Somewhere in her peripheral vision, she noticed news crews arriving outside, probably drawn by the multi-car accident during what had been a political rally downtown. Camera lights flickered through the windows, but her world had narrowed to this one patient, this one chance to save a life. "Come on, damn it," she whispered, pushing harder. "I know you're still in there." After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, she felt a faint pulse under her fingertips, then stronger. The monitor began showing erratic but present cardiac activity. "Got a pulse!" she called out. The man's chest began rising and falling on its own, shallow but steady. His color started to improve from gray to pale pink. As the immediate crisis passed, and other staff could finally assist, Sarah stepped back, her scrubs soaked with sweat. Only then did she really look at the man's face, now that the trauma and blood had been cleaned away. Her stomach dropped. Congressman Robert Hayes. The same Robert Hayes who had voted to cut Medicare funding by 20%. The same Hayes whose anti-immigration rhetoric had made her grandmother cry during his last campaign. The same Hayes who had championed the healthcare reform that had led to the understaffing crisis that made nights like this a regular nightmare at St. Mary's. Sarah stared at the man whose life she had just saved, a man who had made her job infinitely harder and her community infinitely less safe. Her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but now there was something else mixed in a complex swirl of emotions she wasn't prepared for. "Nice work, Sarah," Dr. Chen said, appearing at her elbow. He was still wearing his trauma face, the intense focus that came with life or death decisions. "That was some of the best emergency response I've seen. You saved his life." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Through the trauma bay windows, she could see news crews setting up their equipment. A reporter was already doing a stand-up report. The hospital's emergency entrance lit up dramatically behind her. "The congressman is stable," Dr. Chen continued, checking Hayes' vitals. "Whatever personal feelings anyone might have about his politics, Tonight he's just another patient who needed our help. You did good, Sarah. You did exactly what we're supposed to do. As the chaos settled and Hayes was moved to intensive care, Sarah finally made her way to the parking lot. The news crews were in full swing now, interviewing witnesses and hospital administrators. She tried to slip past unnoticed, but a young reporter spotted her blood-stained scrubs. "Excuse me, are you one of the nurses who treated the accident victims?" The reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Can you tell us about Congressman Hayes' condition?" Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep walking, to avoid the spotlight entirely. But another part, the part that had been frustrated by understaffing, underpaying, and political attacks on healthcare, felt compelled to speak. "Congressman Hayes is stable," she said simply. "We treat every patient with the same level of care, regardless of who they are or what they believe." "Were you the nurse who performed the life-saving CPR?" "I was part of the team that stabilized him, yes." "How does it feel to save the life of someone you might disagree with politically?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. In that trauma bay, he wasn't a congressman. He was a human being who needed help. That's all that matters. As she finally reached her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. "Emma's asleep on my couch. Take your time." She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands still trembling slightly. Tomorrow, this would probably be a feel-good story on the local news. Nurse saves congressman's life despite political differences. A heartwarming reminder that humanity transcends politics. Sarah Martinez had no idea that she had just signed her own professional death warrant. The cameras had captured everything. Her face, her name on the hospital badge, her words about treating everyone equally. What should have been her finest moment as a healthcare professional was about to become the beginning of a nightmare that would test everything she believed about right, wrong, and the cost of doing what's moral in an increasingly divided world. As she drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets, Sarah thought about Emma sleeping peacefully at the neighbor's house, blissfully unaware that her mother had just saved the life of a man who would soon try to destroy both of their lives. The congratulations started before Sarah even arrived at work the next morning. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had seen the early morning news coverage. "Local nurse saves congressman's life," read the headline on Channel 12. The story painted Sarah as a hero, emphasizing her selfless dedication to patient care despite political differences. But by the time Sarah reached the hospital for her next shift, the tone had already begun to shift. "Ms. Martinez." Dr. Richard Blackwell's voice carried across the nurse's station with an unmistakable edge. The hospital administrator rarely descended from his executive suite, and when he did, it usually meant trouble for someone. "My office. Now." Sarah followed Blackwell down the pristine hallway to the administrative wing, a stark contrast to the worn floors and dated equipment in the patient care areas. His corner office overlooked the city, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Phoenix skyline. Blackwell was a political creature first, a healthcare administrator second, the kind of man who saw hospital beds as profit centers rather than places where human suffering was eased. "Sit," he said without looking up from his computer screen. Sarah remained standing. "I understand congratulations are in order," Blackwell continued, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Quite the hero story the media's been spinning." "I did my job," Sarah replied evenly. "Nothing more." Blackwell finally looked at her, his pale blue eyes calculating. "Yes, well, doing your job is one thing. Seeking media attention is quite another. I didn't seek anything. A reporter approached me in the parking lot. And you chose to speak with them. You chose to make this about politics." He turned his monitor toward her, displaying a social media post that made her stomach clench. "Have you seen what you've started?" The post was from Congressman Hayes' official Twitter account, posted just an hour earlier. "Grateful to all the medical professionals at St. Mary's Hospital. Recovery going well. Looking forward to continuing our important work for Arizona's future." Notably absent was any mention of Sarah specifically, despite the news coverage clearly identifying her as the nurse who had performed the life-saving CPR. But that wasn't what made her blood run cold. It was the hundreds of comments beneath the post. "That nurse looked Mexican. Hope they checked her papers." Typical liberal trying to make herself the hero of the story. "Why is a foreigner treating our congressman? What's her background?" Sarah Martinez sounds like an anchor baby name. Deport her whole family. The comments got worse from there, filled with racial slurs and conspiracy theories about Sarah's motivation for saving Hayes' life. Some suggested she had caused the accident. Others claimed she was part of some elaborate Democratic plot. "This is not the kind of attention St. Mary's Hospital needs," Blackwell said, closing the browser window. "We serve a diverse community, and we cannot afford to be seen as politically biased." "Politically biased?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. I saved a man's life. You inserted yourself into a media narrative that has made this hospital a target for political controversy. Look at this. He pulled up another screen showing the hospital's Facebook page. Hundreds of angry comments from people threatening to boycott the hospital, accusing staff of being radical left activists, demanding Sarah be fired. Dr. Blackwell, with respect, I didn't insert myself into anything. I did my job as a nurse, exactly as I was trained to do. Your job as a nurse is to provide medical care quietly and professionally, not to give interviews to reporters about political figures. Sarah felt heat rising in her chest. So, when a reporter asks me about saving someone's life, I should lie? I should pretend it didn't happen? You should refer them to our media relations department, as per hospital policy. Blackwell's tone had shifted from condescending to threatening. Policy you seem to have forgotten. I said nothing controversial. I said we treat all patients equally. And that, Ms. Martinez, is where you made your mistake. In the current political climate, claiming to treat everyone equally is itself a political statement. It implies criticism of those who might not share that view. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Are you seriously telling me that saying we treat all patients equally is controversial? I'm telling you that your comments have created a public relations nightmare for this hospital. We've received calls from donors threatening to withdraw funding, board members are asking questions, and Congressman Hayes' office has expressed concerns about the level of care he received. Concerns? The word came out sharper than Sarah intended. He's alive because of the care he received. What possible concerns could there be? Blackwell leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating gaze of a man who had never worked a day on a hospital floor. There are questions about your qualifications, your judgment, your fitness to treat high-profile patients. My fitness? Sarah's voice cracked with incredulous anger. I have 7 years of ICU experience. I'm certified in advanced cardiac life support, trauma nursing, and your emotional state during the incident. Whether personal bias might have affected your medical decision-making, the implication hit her like a physical blow. Are you suggesting I didn't provide appropriate care? I'm suggesting that the appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as impropriety itself. And right now, Miss Martinez, you have created the appearance that this hospital's emergency care is influenced by the political beliefs of our nursing staff. Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. This was insane. She had saved a man's life, and now she was being accused of what exactly? Providing substandard care? Being politically motivated? She tried to process the twisted logic that could turn a life-saving act into evidence of bias. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to maintain a lower profile. No more media interviews, no more political statements of any kind, and I'm reassigning you to general medical surgical for the next month while we let this controversy die down. MedSurg was a step down from the ICU, both in prestige and pay. It was where new nurses started, not where experienced critical care specialists worked. The demotion was designed to be humiliating, a clear message about the consequences of attracting unwanted attention. Dr. Blackwell, I need the ICU differential pay. I have student loans, rent, my daughter. Should have thought about that before you decided to become a media personality. His tone was final. This meeting is over. Report to MedSurg supervisor Janet Coleman at the start of your next shift. As Sarah walked back through the hospital corridors, she noticed the stares. Some colleagues offered supportive smiles, but others looked away, their discomfort obvious. Word traveled fast in hospitals, and clearly the gossip network was already buzzing with news of her demotion. Her phone buzzed constantly during her remaining hours at work. Most messages were supportive friends, family, and colleagues expressing pride in her actions. But mixed in were other notifications. Her Facebook page had been found by Hayes supporters. Her LinkedIn profile was being bombarded with messages questioning her credentials. Someone had even found her apartment address and posted it online with a suggestion that concerned citizens might want to check on her immigration status. The breaking point came when she checked her voicemail during her lunch break. The first message was from her daughter's school. Miss Martinez, this is Principal Johnson at Desert Vista Elementary. We've received some unusual calls today asking questions about Emma's enrollment and your family's documentation. I want to assure you that we don't release information to random callers, but I thought you should be aware of the situation. Please call me back when you have a chance. Sarah's hands shook as she deleted the message. They were going after her 8-year-old daughter now, for saving someone's life. The second message was even worse. This message is for Sarah Martinez. The voice was electronically disguised, robotic and menacing. "We know where you live. We know where your kid goes to school. Traitors like you need to learn that actions have consequences. Watch your back, anchor baby." Sarah stumbled to the nearest bathroom and locked herself in a stall, fighting waves of nausea. In less than 24 hours, her life had been turned upside down. She was facing professional retaliation, financial hardship, and now direct threats against her child. All for doing exactly what she had been trained to do: save a human life without regard for politics, race, or personal feelings. As she sat in that bathroom stall, Sarah Martinez made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to stay quiet. She wasn't going to accept being demoted for doing the right thing. And she sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone threaten her daughter. She pulled out her phone and called the reporter who had interviewed her the night before. "This is Sarah Martinez from St. Mary's Hospital," she said when the reporter answered. "I think there's more to this story than what made the news yesterday. Are you interested in hearing about how a hospital punishes nurses for saving lives?" What Sarah didn't know was that Congressman Hayes was already 3 steps ahead of her. His chief of staff had spent the morning making calls to influential donors, board members, and political allies. The narrative was being carefully constructed. Sarah Martinez was a politically motivated activist masquerading as a healthcare professional. Her heroic actions were actually a calculated attempt to embarrass the congressman and score political points. And in the governor's mansion across town, Thomas Morrison was reading those same social media posts and news articles with great interest. The ambitious governor saw an opportunity to make a statement about activist healthcare workers and the dangers of mixing politics with patient care. Sarah Martinez was about to discover that saving someone's life could be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. The interview aired on Thursday evening. Sarah had been careful, professional, measured in her words. She spoke about the importance of medical ethics, about treating all patients equally regardless of politics. She mentioned the hospital's understaffing issues that made nights like the accident response so challenging. She never criticized Congressman Hayes directly, never made personal attacks. It didn't matter. By Friday morning, Sarah's life had become a living nightmare. The first sign came at 6:47 a.m. when she was pulled over by Phoenix police officer Danny Torres, just 3 blocks from her apartment. Sarah had been driving to work, the same route she took every day, when the patrol car's lights began flashing behind her. "License and registration," Officer Torres said when she rolled down her window. His tone was brusque, professional, but Sarah caught something in his eyes, a hardness that seemed personal. "Was I speeding, officer?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. She had been driving exactly the speed limit, as she always did. "Your registration is expired," Torres said, examining her documents with exaggerated care. Sarah's heart sank. It was true she had received the renewal notice weeks ago but hadn't been able to afford the fees. Between Emma's school supplies, groceries, and her student loan payment, the $78 registration fee had been pushed to next month's budget. "I know it's expired," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for my next paycheck to—" "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The traffic stop stretched to 45 minutes. Officer Torres questioned Sarah extensively about where she was going, where she lived, how long she had been in Arizona, whether she had any outstanding warrants. He searched her car thoroughly, emptying her purse, going through her medical textbooks, even inspecting Emma's car seat with suspicious intensity. "You're that nurse," he finally said as he wrote up the citation. It wasn't a question. "The one on the news." Sarah said nothing, sensing the conversation had moved into dangerous territory. "My wife thinks you're some kind of hero," Torres continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Me? I think you're an attention-seeking troublemaker who got lucky once and now thinks she's better than everyone else." He handed her the ticket, $350 for expired registration, plus court costs, nearly half her weekly take-home pay. "Drive carefully, Miss Martinez. We'll be watching." The threat was clear, barely disguised as professional courtesy. Sarah arrived at work an hour late, shaken and angry. The med-surg unit was a different world from the ICU, less intense, more routine, and with a supervisor who clearly resented having an ICU nurse dumped into her department. "You're late," Janet Coleman said without looking up from her charts. Coleman was a thin, sharp-faced woman in her 50s who had been passed over for the ICU supervisor position that Sarah had been considered for the previous year. "I was pulled over. Traffic citation. Personal problems, stay at home, Martinez. This isn't the ICU where you can do whatever you want. Here we follow rules." The day got worse from there. Coleman assigned Sarah to the most difficult patients, a combative dementia patient who required constant supervision, a post-surgical patient whose family complained about everything, and a man recovering from a heart attack who spent the entire shift making racist comments and demanding a real American nurse. During her lunch break, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing then. We know where you work, bitch. We know where your kid goes to school. Accidents happen to traders. The line went dead. Sarah reported the call to hospital security, but the guard on duty, a new hire named Chuck Morrison, no relation to the governor, he'd clarified with a smirk, was dismissive. Crank calls come with fame, lady. Maybe think about that next time you want to be on TV. Are you going to file a report or not? What's to report? Someone called you names? Welcome to the real world. That afternoon, Sarah picked up Emma from school to find her daughter in tears. The kids are saying mean things about you, Mama, Emma sobbed as they walked to the car. Tommy Brennan said his dad says you're a bad person who only helps other bad people. And Mrs. Peterson asked me if we have the right papers to be in America. Sarah's blood ran cold. Mrs. Peterson asked you what? Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. She said she was just curious about our family background. She wanted to know if Daddy was American too, and if you were born here, and if we had all the right papers to stay. A teacher, a goddamn elementary school teacher, was interrogating her 8-year-old daughter about their immigration status. That evening, as Sarah helped Emma with homework while trying to ignore the constant buzzing of her phone, more threatening calls, more social media harassment, she heard vehicles in the parking lot outside their apartment complex. Through the window, she saw 3 ICE vans parked near the building entrance. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents were conducting a raid. Sarah knew the raid wasn't for her. She was a natural-born U.S. citizen, as was Emma. But the message was clear. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone wanted her to see those vans, wanted her to understand how easily her life could be destroyed. She watched through her window as agents led away Mr. Gonzalez from apartment 2B, a gentleman who worked construction and always held the door for her when they met at the mailboxes. His wife and 3 young children, all born in Arizona, cried on the sidewalk as their father was loaded into the van. Mama, why are those men taking Mr. Gonzalez away? Emma asked, joining her at the window. I don't know, baby, Sarah lied, pulling her daughter close. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her ex-husband, Michael. Sarah, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? Hello to you too, Michael. I'm serious. I've been getting calls all day. People are saying you're some kind of radical activist, that you're unfit to have custody of Emma. Sarah's stomach dropped. What people? Friends, family, my co-workers. Someone even called my boss asking questions about your politics and whether Emma is safe with you. Emma is perfectly safe with me, Michael. You know that, do I? Because from what I'm seeing on social media, you've turned into some kind of political crusader, taking on congressmen, giving inflammatory interviews. I saved a man's life, Sarah's voice rose, causing Emma to look up from her coloring book with concern. And then you couldn't leave it alone, could you? Had to make it about politics. Had to get on your soapbox. I defended myself against unfair treatment. You put our daughter in danger? Michael's voice was harsh, angrier than she had heard him in years. People are posting pictures of our apartment building online, Sarah. They have Emma's school address. I got 3 calls today from people asking if I thought Emma would be safer with her father. The implication was clear. Michael was considering filing for emergency custody, using the current crisis as grounds to take Emma away. Michael, please, don't do this. Emma needs stability right now, not more upheaval. Maybe she needs to be away from whatever shitstorm you've created? After he hung up, Sarah sat on her couch staring at the wall while Emma colored quietly beside her. Everything was falling apart. Her career, her safety, her family, all because she had done exactly what any decent nurse would do in a medical emergency. The next morning brought a new horror. Sarah woke to find her Honda Civic covered in graffiti, spray painted across the windshield in red letters, "Go back to Mexico." The tires had been slashed, and someone had keyed "traitor" along the driver's side door. She called the police to report the vandalism. The responding officer was professional but skeptical. Any idea who might have done this? Officer Williams asked, taking photos of the damage. I've been receiving threats since the news story about— Oh, you're the nurse, Williams interrupted, his tone shifting. The one who's been all over the media. I saved someone's life. Uh-huh. Williams continued his documentation with noticeably less enthusiasm. Well, this looks like random vandalism to me. Probably kids. Happens all the time in this neighborhood. Random vandalism? It says go back to Mexico. Could be kids copying stuff they've seen online. Hard to prove it was targeted. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. So you're not going to investigate? I'll file the report, but without witnesses or evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. Williams shrugged. Your insurance should cover the damage. As Williams drove away, Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, approached hesitantly. I saw them, she said quietly, glancing around nervously. 3 men in a pickup truck. About 2 a.m. I was up with the baby. Did you get a license plate? I'm sorry, Sarah. I was scared. After what happened to Mr. Gonzalez yesterday. Mrs. Chen's voice trailed off. I can't get involved. I have my family to think about. Sarah understood. The message had been received by the entire community. This is what happens to people who attract the wrong kind of attention. This is what happens to troublemakers. As she arranged for a tow truck and called in late to work, Sarah realized that the systematic campaign against her was just beginning. Several someones with real power and influence were orchestrating her destruction. The police harassment, the ICE raids, the vandalism, even the calls to her ex-husband, it was all too coordinated to be random. They wanted her destroyed as an example to others. They wanted other healthcare workers to see what happened when you stepped out of line, when you spoke truth to power, when you refused to be quietly grateful for being allowed to save the lives of people who despised you. Sarah Martinez was about to discover just how far powerful people would go to destroy someone who threatened their narrative. And she was about to learn that in America, doing the right thing could make you a target of the very system you had sworn to serve. The governor's office had been monitoring the situation with great interest. By Monday morning, Thomas Morrison would make his move. Governor Thomas Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office in the Arizona State Capitol, gazing out at the Phoenix skyline with the satisfaction of a man who owned everything he surveyed. At 52, Morrison was the embodiment of political ambition, wrapped in a carefully crafted populist package, silver-haired, square-jawed, with the kind of commanding presence that played well on television and even better at campaign rallies. His approval ratings were solid, but Morrison had bigger aspirations than governor. The White House beckoned, and that required a national profile built on the kind of decisive leadership moments that grabbed headlines and fired up the base. The Sarah Martinez situation had been dropped in his lap like an early Christmas gift. Sir? His chief of staff, Rebecca Walsh, knocked on the door. The hospital board meeting is starting in 10 minutes, and Congressman Hayes is on line 1. Morrison smiled. Put him through. Hayes's voice crackled through the speakerphone, still weak from his recent ordeal but sharp with political calculation. Tom, we need to discuss this Martinez situation before it gets completely out of hand. I've been following it closely, Bob. Seems to me it's already out of hand. She's making me look like an ungrateful asshole, Hayes continued, his voice gaining strength. Every news cycle, there's another story about how I haven't thanked her properly, how the hospital is retaliating against her for saving my life. My approval numbers are taking a hit with suburban women. Morrison leaned back in his leather chair. What exactly are you asking me to do? I need her gone, Tom. Completely gone. Discredited, unemployed, maybe even deported if we can make that stick. She needs to serve as an example of what happens when healthcare workers think they can play politics. Deported? She's a natural-born citizen. Then we make her life so miserable she leaves Arizona voluntarily. Look, this isn't just about me anymore. This woman is becoming a symbol for every bleeding heart nurse and doctor who thinks they know better than the people who fund their hospitals. She's dangerous. Morrison understood. In the current political climate, symbols mattered more than facts. Sarah Martinez had become a symbol of resistance to the natural order, a challenge to the authority structure that kept politicians like Hayes and Morrison in power. She represented the dangerous idea that individual conscience could trump institutional loyalty. I'll handle it, Morrison said. But I'll need your people to coordinate messaging. This has to look organic. Done. My communications team is already working on it. After ending the call, Morrison turned to his chief of staff. Get me a meeting with the St. Mary's Board of Directors, today, and I want a full background check on this Martinez woman, finances, family, any vulnerabilities we can exploit. Sir, with respect, the hospital board meeting is already in progress. Shouldn't we? Rebecca. Morrison's voice carried the quiet authority that had made him one of the most feared political operators in Arizona. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I'm paying St. Tumai/Antanhez, Mary's board a personal visit. 2 hours later, Governor Morrison's motorcade pulled up to St. Mary's Hospital with enough fanfare to ensure maximum media attention. 3 black SUVs, police escort, the works. Hospital administrators scrambled to prepare for the unexpected visit while news crews rushed to set up their equipment. Dr. Blackwell met Morrison at the hospital's main entrance, his usual smugness replaced by nervous deference. "Governor, this is an unexpected honor. If we had known you were coming, sometimes the most important conversations happen without advance notice, Richard." Morrison's smile was politically perfect, warm for the cameras, but cold around the eyes. "I understand you're having some personnel challenges." As they walked through the hospital corridors toward the boardroom, Morrison made sure to stop and shake hands with staff members, pose for photos with patients, and deliver sound bites about his commitment to healthcare excellence. But his real focus was on the message he was about to deliver to the board. The boardroom fell silent when Morrison entered. 12 of the most influential healthcare executives and community leaders in Phoenix sat around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from honored to terrified. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began without preamble, "we have a problem that threatens the integrity of our healthcare system and the safety of our communities." Board Chairman William Sterling, a wealthy real estate developer who had donated millions to Morrison's campaigns, cleared his throat nervously. "Governor, if this is about the Martinez situation, it's about much more than one rogue employee bill. It's about the politicization of medicine. It's about activist healthcare workers who think their personal beliefs should override professional standards and institutional authority." Morrison began pacing around the room, his voice building with practiced political rhythm. "Sarah Martinez has become a symbol, but symbols can be dangerous things. Right now, every radical nurse and doctor in Arizona is watching this situation, wondering if they too can grandstand for the cameras, if they too can use their positions to push political agendas." Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez, one of the few board members with actual medical background, spoke up carefully. "Governor, Miss Martinez saved a man's life. Isn't that exactly what we want our healthcare workers to do?" Morrison's smile turned predatory. "Doctor, with all due respect, that's a naive view of what actually happened. Miss Martinez didn't just save a life. She created a media spectacle. She gave politically charged interviews. She positioned herself as morally superior to the very congressman whose life she saved. That's not healthcare, that's activism. But her medical actions were beyond reproach," Dr. Ramirez pressed. "Every physician who reviewed the case agrees she performed flawlessly under pressure. Her medical actions, perhaps? But her subsequent behavior has created a crisis that extends far beyond this hospital." Morrison placed his hands on the conference table and leaned forward. "I've received calls from major donors threatening to withdraw funding not just from St. Mary's, but from every major medical institution in Arizona. Federal legislators are asking questions about oversight of healthcare workers. The reputation of our entire state healthcare system is at stake." The room fell silent. Morrison had framed the issue perfectly. This wasn't about punishing a nurse for saving someone. It was about protecting the integrity of the healthcare system from political extremists. Dr. Blackwell, sensing which way the wind was blowing, jumped in. "Governor, we've already taken disciplinary action. Ms. Martinez has been transferred out of the ICU and—" "That's not enough, Richard." Morrison's voice hardened. "This woman has become a lightning rod for controversy. Every day she remains employed here, she represents a potential liability. What happens the next time she decides to give an interview? What happens when she treats another high-profile patient and decides to make political statements?" Board member Patricia Hendricks, a prominent Republican donor, nodded vigorously. "The governor is right. We can't allow our hospital to become a platform for political activism. Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I have reason to believe that Miss Martinez's employment here may violate federal guidelines regarding healthcare worker qualifications. My Attorney General's office is prepared to launch a comprehensive investigation into her credentials, her conduct, and her fitness to practice nursing in Arizona." The threat was crystal clear. Morrison was offering the board a choice: fire Sarah Martinez voluntarily or face a prolonged legal and political battle that would devastate the hospital's reputation and funding. Dr. Ramirez made one last attempt. "Governor, this sets a dangerous precedent. If we fire healthcare workers for speaking to the media, we fire healthcare workers who use their positions to advance political agendas," Morrison interrupted. "We fire healthcare workers who create liability for their institutions. We fire healthcare workers who put ideology before patient care." "She saved his life?" Dr. Ramirez's voice rose despite her efforts to remain professional. And then she couldn't resist making herself the hero of the story. She couldn't resist taking political shots at the man whose life she saved. That's not medical professionalism, that's ego-driven activism. Morrison had masterfully reframed the entire narrative. Sarah's comments about treating all patients equally were now political shots. Her professional pride and life-saving work was now ego-driven activism, her refusal to be quietly grateful for. Mistreatment was now evidence of her unfitness to practice medicine. William Sterling finally spoke up. "Governor, what exactly are you asking us to do?" "I'm asking you to protect this institution and this community from an individual whose judgment and professionalism are clearly compromised. I'm asking you to send a clear message that St. Blank Mary's Hospital serves all patients without political bias, which means we cannot employ staff members who use their positions to make political statements." The irony was breathtaking. Morrison was demanding Sarah be fired for political reasons while claiming to protect the hospital from politics. "Of course," Morrison continued with a slight smile. "This is entirely your decision as the hospital board. The state respects institutional autonomy. But I should mention that St. Mary's receives approximately $47 million annually in state funding, including critical infrastructure grants that are up for renewal next month." The threat couldn't have been clearer if Morrison had carved it in stone. Fire Sarah Martinez or lose state funding. $47 million was more than enough to bankrupt the hospital or force massive layoffs and service cuts. Dr. Blackwell was practically salivating at the opportunity to remove the troublesome nurse who had made his life difficult. "Governor, I believe I speak for the entire board when I say that St. Mary's is committed to maintaining the highest standards of professionalism among our staff." "I certainly hope so, Richard. Because make no mistake, the entire state is watching how this situation is resolved. Healthcare workers across Arizona are watching to see whether professional standards matter or whether political grandstanding is rewarded." As Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back to address the room one final time. "One more thing. I'll be holding a press conference tomorrow morning to address the concerning trend of political activism in healthcare settings. I trust that by then, this board will have taken appropriate action to ensure that St. Mary's Hospital remains focused on medical care rather than political theater." The message was delivered with perfect political deniability. Morrison had never explicitly ordered Sarah's firing, he had simply explained the consequences of not firing her and let the board draw their own conclusions. As the governor's motorcade pulled away from the hospital, news crews captured footage of his solemn expression and confident stride. The story would write itself. Strong leader takes decisive action to protect healthcare integrity. Inside the boardroom, the vote was swift and unanimous. Dr. Ramirez abstained in protest, but she was alone in her resistance. Sarah Martinez would be terminated immediately, effective pending the completion of a formal disciplinary review that everyone knew was mere bureaucratic theater. Morrison's next stop was the Attorney General's office, where his legal team was already preparing a comprehensive investigation into Sarah's professional conduct, personal finances, and immigration status. They would find something they always did when motivated by political necessity. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, she had no idea that her professional life had just been ended by the governor of Arizona. She had no idea that powerful men in expensive suits had spent their afternoon plotting her destruction with the casual efficiency of a business meeting. All she knew was that the anonymous phone calls were increasing, her car was still in the shop, and Emma had come home from school with another disturbing story about teachers asking inappropriate questions. The phone rang as Sarah was washing dishes. Unknown number again. "Hello?" she answered wearily. "This is Channel 12 News. We'd like your comment on Governor Morrison's announcement that you're being investigated for professional misconduct and potential immigration violations." Sarah's hands went numb. The plate she was holding slipped into the soapy water with a splash. "I'm sorry, what?" "The governor just announced that the Attorney General's office is launching a formal investigation into your qualifications and conduct. Do you have any response?" Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her world spinning. She was being investigated by the state government for saving someone's life. I have no comment at this time." As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized that she was no longer fighting a battle against workplace retaliation or social media trolls. She was fighting a war against the full power of the state government, and Thomas Morrison was just getting started. The termination letter arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning. Sarah signed for it with hands that had saved countless lives, but now trembled as she opened the official hospital stationery. Effective immediately due to violation of hospital media policies and conduct unbecoming a healthcare professional, pending completion of state investigation into professional qualifications. Final paycheck will be withheld pending resolution of disciplinary review. They weren't even going to pay her the money she had already earned. Sarah read the letter 3 times before it sank in. 7 years of exemplary service, countless lives saved, Not a single mark on her professional record, all erased by 36 hours of political theater. She was unemployed, under investigation, and essentially blacklisted from healthcare work in Arizona. The financial math was brutal and immediate. Without her ICU salary of $2,847 per month, Sarah couldn't make rent, $1,200, her student loan payment, $387, car insurance, $156, or cover basic necessities like food and Emma's school supplies. Her savings account held exactly $312, enough for maybe 2 weeks of groceries if she stretched every dollar. The eviction notice came just 5 days after her termination. The management company that owned her apartment complex had clearly been following the news coverage and decided that a controversial tenant wasn't worth the potential hassle. 30 days to vacate, no exceptions, no discussion. Sarah's attempts to find new employment hit wall after wall. The major hospital systems in Phoenix all gave variations of the same response. "We're not hiring for ICU positions at this time," or "We'll keep your resume on file." The subtext was clear: no healthcare institution wanted to touch the nurse who had become a political lightning rod. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Dean of Nursing at Arizona State University, and a woman Sarah had never met in person, changed everything with a single phone call on a Thursday afternoon when Sarah was researching moving truck rental prices and wondering how to explain to Emma that they might have to live with Grandma in Tucson. "Ms. Martinez? This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from ASU's College of Nursing. I've been following your situation in the news, and I wonder if we might meet for coffee." Sarah was suspicious. In the past 2 weeks, every unexpected phone call had brought bad news. "I'm sorry, Dr. Walsh, but if this is about the investigation or media interviews, I'm not—" "Miss Martinez," Dr. Walsh interrupted gently, "I'm calling because what happened to you is unconscionable. You saved a man's life and have been systematically destroyed for it. I'd like to help, if you'll let me." They met at a small coffee shop in Tempe, far from the Phoenix hospitals where Sarah's face had become recognizable. Dr. Hooting, Walsh was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of fighting battles in the male-dominated medical hierarchy. "I've reviewed your case extensively," Dr. Walsh said without preamble. "Spoken to colleagues at St. Mary's, looked at your employment record, even watched security footage from the night you saved Congressman Hayes. What I saw was textbook emergency nursing performed under extreme pressure." Sarah stirred her coffee absently. "Apparently, textbook emergency nursing is considered political activism now, only when it threatens powerful people's narratives." Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? What's happened to you represents something much larger and more dangerous than personal retaliation. It's an attack on the fundamental principle that healthcare workers must follow their professional ethics regardless of politics." "Dr. Walsh, I appreciate your support, but I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. I can't even get hired as a med-surg nurse anymore. My professional life is over." "Your professional life in Arizona might be over, but your professional life as a nurse isn't. And more importantly, your voice as an advocate for healthcare workers isn't." Dr. Walsh explained that Sarah's case had been quietly circulating among nursing educators and medical professionals nationwide. The American Nurses Association was preparing a statement condemning her treatment. Medical ethics professors were using her case as an example in their classes. "But it's not enough to have academic discussions," Dr. Walsh continued. "We need someone willing to stand up and speak truth to power. Someone willing to fight back. I've been fighting back. Look where it's gotten me. You've been fighting alone. That's about to change." Dr. Walsh was part of an informal network of healthcare professionals who had been watching the systematic political attacks on medical workers with growing alarm. Doctors who had faced retaliation for prescribing contraception in conservative states. Nurses who had been fired for advocating for patient safety. Medical researchers whose funding had been cut for studying politically sensitive topics. "We call ourselves healthcare professionals for truth," Dr. Walsh explained. "We're not a formal organization, just a group of colleagues who believe that medical ethics can't be subordinated to politics. We've been looking for a case that would crystallize the issue for the public. And unfortunately, you've become that case." The proposal was both terrifying and tempting. Dr. Walsh's network could provide legal support, media training, and financial assistance, while Sarah pursued federal civil rights claims against the state and the hospital. In exchange, Sarah would become the public face of resistance to political intimidation of healthcare workers. "I have an 8-year-old daughter," Sarah said finally. "She's already been targeted by this. Her school, her friends' parents, everyone knows about this now, which is exactly why we need to fight this, Dr. Damey," Walsh replied. Because if we don't, Emma will grow up in a world where healthcare workers are afraid to speak up for their patients, afraid to advocate for proper care, afraid to follow their professional ethics because they might anger the wrong politician. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling while Emma slept beside her. They were sharing a bed now. Sarah had sold most of their furniture to pay for groceries and the security deposit on a storage unit for their remaining possessions. Her phone, which had been mercifully quiet for most of the evening, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news. No things are hard. Sending 50 for groceries. You did the right thing. A nurse in Michigan. Over the next hour, more messages arrived. Nurses, doctors, paramedics, hospital workers from across the country, all sending small amounts of money through various apps. $5 here, 20 there, occasionally 50 or 100. None of the individual amounts were large, but together they added up to real money enough for rent this month, enough to keep fighting. The messages that came with the donations were even more powerful than the money. ICU nurse in Portland. What happened to you could happen to any of us. Thank you for standing up. ER doctor in Chicago. Your courage gives me hope that we can still do what's right. Nursing student in Atlanta. You're the reason I want to work in healthcare. Sarah realized that her story had resonated far beyond Arizona's borders. Healthcare workers across the country saw her persecution as a preview of what could happen to them if they stepped out of line, if they prioritized patient care over politics, if they refused to stay silent about problems in the system. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. Sarah Martinez? This is Marcus Chen from the American Civil Liberties Union. We've been following your case, and we believe your civil rights have been violated. We'd like to represent you pro bono in federal court. Within a week, Sarah had a legal team, a publicist also working pro bono, and a GoFundMe campaign that had raised over $75,000 from healthcare workers and supporters nationwide. The campaign's description was simple: support a nurse who was destroyed for saving a life. But it was the investigative reporting that began to emerge that truly changed the narrative. A journalist from the Washington Post had spent 2 weeks in Phoenix, interviewing hospital staff, reviewing public records, and documenting the coordination between Governor Morrison's office, Congressman Hayes' staff, and the hospital board. The resulting article, published on a Sunday morning, was devastating to Morrison and Hayes. It revealed the private conversations, the explicit threats to hospital funding, and the calculated campaign to destroy Sarah's reputation and career. Most damaging were the recorded phone calls between Hayes and Morrison, discussing Sarah as if she were a political problem to be eliminated rather than a human being who had saved a life. She needs to serve as an example, Hayes was heard saying on one recording. Other healthcare workers need to see what happens when you step out of line. The article sparked outrage beyond the healthcare community. Editorial boards at major newspapers condemned the vindictive persecution of a healthcare hero. Medical associations issued statements supporting Sarah. Nurses at hospitals across the country began wearing buttons that said, "I am Sarah Martinez." But the most powerful moment came during a live television interview on CNN. The anchor had asked Sarah about her regrets, clearly expecting her to say she wished she had stayed quiet after saving Hayes' life. Instead, Sarah looked directly into the camera and said, "My only regret is that I live in a country where saving someone's life can be treated as a political act, where doing your job as a healthcare professional can make you an enemy of the state. But I'm not sorry I saved Congressman Hayes. I'd do it again tomorrow, because that's what nurses do. We save lives, even when those lives belong to people who hate us." The clip went viral immediately. Sarah Martinez began trending on social media. Healthcare workers posted pictures of themselves with signs reading, "We save lives regardless of politics." Sarah had become more than a nurse who saved a congressman. She had become a symbol of resistance to the politicization of healthcare, of the principle that medical ethics transcended political loyalty. And in the governor's mansion, Thomas Morrison was beginning to realize that his carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Sarah Martinez had backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing a troublesome nurse, he had created a national movement and made himself the face of governmental overreach. The battle was far from over, but Sarah Martinez was no longer fighting alone. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix had never seen anything like it. More than 300 healthcare workers, wearing scrubs and white coats, stood in silent formation on the courthouse steps. They held signs reading, "Healthcare is not political," and "We are all Sarah Martinez." But what made the demonstration truly powerful was the silent 300 medical professionals standing witness to what they saw as an attack on the fundamental ethics of their profession. Sarah walked through the crowd toward the courthouse entrance, flanked by her legal team from the ACLU. The past month had transformed her from an isolated, persecuted nurse into the reluctant leader of a national movement. She had testified before a congressional subcommittee, appeared on national news programs, and become the face of healthcare worker resistance to political intimidation. "Good morning, Sarah." Dr. Walsh appeared at her elbow, wearing her ASU faculty coat over scrubs. "Ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be for suing the governor of their home state," Sarah replied, managing a nervous smile. The lawsuit they were filing was comprehensive: violation of civil rights, retaliation for protected speech, conspiracy to deprive Sarah of due process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But more than seeking damages, the suit aimed to establish legal precedent protecting healthcare workers from political retaliation for performing their professional duties. Inside the courthouse, the media presence was overwhelming. National news networks, medical journals, healthcare publications, and political reporters all crowded into the gallery. This had become more than a local news story. It was a national referendum on the politicization of healthcare. Marcus Chen, Sarah's lead attorney, approached the podium with quiet confidence. He was a veteran civil rights lawyer who had spent 2 decades fighting government overreach. But even he had been shocked by the brazen nature of Morrison's campaign against Sarah. "Your Honor," Chen began, "this case represents something unprecedented in American jurisprudence: the systematic persecution of a healthcare professional for the crime of saving a human life and refusing to remain silent about subsequent retaliation." The evidence Chen presented was damning. Phone records showing coordination between Morrison's office, Hayes's staff, and hospital administrators. Email chains discussing strategies to discredit and eliminate Sarah. Financial records proving that state funding threats had been used to coerce her termination. Most devastating were the recordings Morrison and Hayes discussing Sarah as if she were a piece on a political chessboard rather than a human being whose only offense had been performing exemplary emergency medical care. "The defendants will claim this was about hospital policy and professional standards," Chen continued. "But the evidence shows a coordinated campaign to destroy Ms. Sproplake Martinez's career, reputation, and financial stability for the explicit purpose of sending a message to other healthcare workers: stay silent or face annihilation." Governor Morrison's attorney, a high-priced Phoenix law firm partner named Davidson, attempted to argue that the governor had simply been protecting healthcare integrity from political activism. But his argument fell apart under the weight of evidence showing that Morrison's actions were themselves entirely political. "Your Honor, Governor Morrison was doing his job ensuring that state-funded institutions maintain appropriate professional standards," Davidson argued weakly. Judge Patricia Williams, a Clinton appointee known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for government overreach, was clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Davidson, are you seriously arguing that saving someone's life represents a violation of professional standards?" "No, Your Honor, but the subsequent media interviews and political statements—" "Ah, yes, the political statement," Judge Williams interrupted, consulting her notes. "The political statement that was, and I quote from the transcript, 'We treat every patient with the same level of care, regardless of who they are or what they believe.' That political statement?" Davidson's face reddened. "Your Honor, in context, Mr. Davidson, your client orchestrated the systematic destruction of a healthcare worker's career because she saved someone's life and then refused to be quietly grateful for being punished for it." The hearing lasted 4 hours, but the outcome was clear within the first 30 minutes. Judge Williams issued a temporary restraining order, preventing any further state retaliation against Sarah, and ordered Morrison's office to preserve all documents related to her case. Outside the courthouse, the celebration among the healthcare workers was subdued but meaningful. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The real turning point came 3 days later, when Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez, the board member who had opposed Sarah's firing, called a press conference of her own. "I can no longer remain silent about what happened in that boardroom," Dr. Ramirez announced to a packed room of reporters. "Governor Morrison didn't just threaten our funding, he explicitly demanded that we fire Sarah Martinez or face the complete destruction of our hospital's financial viability." Dr. Ramirez had brought documentation, notes from the meeting, emails between board members, and recordings she had made on her phone during Morrison's visit. The evidence showed beyond any doubt that the governor had used the power of his office to destroy a private citizen for political reasons. "This wasn't about hospital policy or professional standards," Dr. Ramirez continued. "This was about punishing someone who had embarrassed powerful people by doing her job too well. Sarah Martinez saved a man's life with exceptional skill and professionalism, and for that, she was marked for destruction. The revelations triggered a cascade of consequences. The state legislature's Democratic minority called for Morrison's impeachment. Medical associations across the country issued formal condemnations. Hospital workers in Phoenix began organizing union drives, citing Sarah's case as evidence that they needed protection from political interference. Most importantly, other healthcare workers began coming forward with their own stories of political retaliation. Dr. Patricia Santos revealed that she had been forced out of her position at a state university after publishing research on reproductive health outcomes. Nurse practitioner Michael Kim shared how his contract had been terminated after he testified before the legislature about vaccination policy. Sarah's case had opened the floodgates. Healthcare workers across Arizona and beyond began sharing stories of political pressure, funding threats, and career retaliation for following medical ethics over political demands. The breakthrough came when 60 Minutes aired a comprehensive investigation into political interference in healthcare. The segment featured Sarah prominently, but it also revealed the scope of the problem: nationwide doctors losing privileges for providing legal medical services, researchers losing funding for studying politically sensitive topics, nurses being fired for advocating for patient safety. The public response was overwhelming. Hospital systems that had initially distanced themselves from Sarah began reaching out, offering positions and publicly supporting her cause. Medical schools invited her to speak. Nursing organizations gave her awards. But it was the call from Johns Hopkins Hospital that changed everything. Miss Martinez? This is Dr. Amanda Foster, Chief Nursing Officer at Johns Hopkins. We've been following your case, and we'd like to offer you a position in our cardiac ICU. Johns Hopkins, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the world, offering her not just employment but advancement, a position that would normally require years of additional experience and credentials. Dr. Foster, I'm honored, but I should mention that I'm currently under investigation by the Arizona Medical Board. Ms. Martinez, our lawyers have reviewed that investigation thoroughly. It's politically motivated harassment with no basis in medical fact. Your credentials are impeccable, your experience is exactly what we need, and your integrity is beyond question. The offer came with a 40% salary increase, full benefits, and legal support for her ongoing federal case. But more than the personal vindication, it represented something larger: a major medical institution taking a public stand that political persecution of healthcare workers would not be tolerated. Sarah's acceptance of the Johns Hopkins position became national news. The message was clear: excellence in healthcare would be rewarded, not punished, and institutions of real integrity would protect their staff from political interference. The dominoes continued to fall. Morrison's approval ratings plummeted as more evidence of his vindictive campaign emerged. Hayes lost his primary election to a moderate challenger who campaigned on putting healthcare before politics. Several St. Mary's board members resigned in disgrace. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during Sarah's final television interview before leaving Arizona. The anchor asked her if she had any message for Governor Morrison and Congressman Hayes. Sarah looked directly into the camera and said, "I want to thank them. By trying to destroy me for saving a life, they've inadvertently created a movement that will protect healthcare workers for years to come. Their vindictive cruelty has made the entire medical profession stronger and more unified." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "And I want them to know that if either of them ever needs emergency medical care, I'll be there to save their lives too. Because that's what nurses do, we save lives, even when those lives belong to people who tried to destroy us." The interview went viral immediately. Healthcare workers across the country shared it with the hashtag #That'sWhatNursesDo. Medical ethics professors assigned it as required viewing. It became a defining moment in the national conversation about healthcare, politics, and professional integrity. A week before Sarah was scheduled to leave for Baltimore, she received one final, unexpected visitor. Dr. Blackwell appeared at her apartment door, looking haggard and defeated. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "What I did was cowardly and wrong. I let political pressure override my professional judgment, and I destroyed the career of one of our best nurses." Sarah studied the man who had been instrumental in her persecution. "Dr. Blackwell, I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't undo the damage. Emma and I lost our home, our security, our peace of mind. We were terrorized for months. I know I can't fix what I broke. But I wanted you to know that your case has changed how I think about administrative responsibility. I'm resigning from St. Mary's and donating a significant sum to the Legal Defense Fund for healthcare workers facing political retaliation." It was a small gesture in the face of enormous harm, but it represented something important: acknowledgement that what had been done to Sarah was wrong, and that the people responsible were finally being held accountable. As Sarah and Emma packed their belongings for the move to Maryland, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. She had lost one life only to gain another, more meaningful one. She had been destroyed only to be rebuilt stronger and more purposeful. The final confrontation was still to come, but Sarah Martinez was no longer the isolated, persecuted nurse who had been afraid to fight back. She was the leader of a movement, the voice of healthcare workers everywhere, and living proof that sometimes doing the right thing no matter the cost can change the world. The St. Mary's Hospital board meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, but by 5:30, the parking lot was already overflowing with supporters. They came in waves: nurses, still wearing scrubs from their day shifts, doctors in white coats, paramedics, nursing students, and community members who had been following Sarah's story. The hospital had never seen anything like it. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, watching the crowd gather. Tomorrow, she and Emma would be driving to Baltimore to start their new life. But tonight, she had one last battle to fight in Arizona. The hospital board had called this special meeting to address ongoing concerns about institutional policies, but everyone knew what it really was: a final showdown over her case. Dr. Walsh appeared at her car window. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said as Sarah stepped out. "You've already won. Hopkins is waiting, the federal case is proceeding, Morrison's career is in ruins. You could just walk away." "If I walk away now, nothing changes for the next nurse who speaks up," Sarah replied. "This isn't about me anymore, it's about whether healthcare institutions will protect their staff or sacrifice them to political pressure." The crowd parted as Sarah walked toward the hospital entrance, many reaching out to touch her arm or offer words of encouragement. A news crew followed, documenting what had become a national story about the collision between healthcare ethics and political power. Inside the hospital, the boardroom was packed beyond capacity. The fire marshal had already been called twice, and hospital security was struggling to maintain order. Board members sat at their polished table looking distinctly uncomfortable as hundreds of eyes focused on them with laser intensity. Chairman William Sterling called the meeting to order with a trembling voice. "Before we begin, I want to establish that this is a private board meeting, and anyone disrupting proceedings will be asked to leave." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd, but they remained seated. "The purpose of tonight's meeting," Sterling continued, "is to address the ongoing controversy surrounding former employee Sarah Martinez and to clarify our institutional policies regarding—" "Mr. Sterling." The voice cut through the room like a blade. Governor Morrison stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 state police officers, and looking every inch the powerful politician who was used to getting his way. The crowd fell silent, tension crackling through the air. "Governor Morrison," Sterling stammered, clearly not expecting this appearance. "This is unexpected." Morrison strode to the front of the room with theatrical confidence, though those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the tightness around his eyes that suggested a man under enormous pressure. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of Arizona's most feared politicians. "I'm here tonight because the integrity of our state's healthcare system is at stake." "Well," a chorus of boos erupted from the crowd, but Morrison raised his hand for silence. "You may not like what I have to say, but you need to hear it. The St. Private 62. Mary's Hospital Board has allowed itself to be intimidated by radical activists who care more about political theater than patient care." Sarah stood up from her seat in the front row. "Governor Morrison, I saved a man's life. That's not political theater, that's nursing." Morrison turned to face her directly, his political instincts telling him to seize this moment for maximum impact. "Ms. Martinez, you performed basic medical procedures that any competent nurse could have performed. What made your actions political was your decision to grandstand for the cameras afterward, to position yourself as a hero while implicitly criticizing the very man whose life you saved." "I criticize no one," Sarah replied calmly. "I simply stated that we treat all patients equally. If you find that statement controversial, perhaps you should examine your own values." The crowd erupted in applause, but Morrison pressed on. "What you did was use your platform as a healthcare worker to make political statements. You turned a routine medical response into a media spectacle. You put your own ego ahead of institutional integrity." Dr. Ramirez stood up from the board table. "Governor, with all due respect, nothing about that night was routine. Miss Sunny Nate 17. Martinez performed under extraordinary pressure and saved a man's life through exceptional skill and quick thinking." "Dr. Ramirez, you've already made your biases clear," Morrison shot back. But let me make something clear to everyone in this room: the state of Arizona will not stand by while healthcare institutions become platforms for political activism. The threat was clear and public now. Morrison was doubling down on his campaign against Sarah, making explicit the connection between political orthodoxy and state funding. Sarah felt a moment of crystalline clarity. This was it, the moment that would define not just her case, but the future of healthcare worker rights across the country. She stood and walked toward the front of the room, facing Morrison directly. "Governor Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room, "you've spent months trying to destroy my life because I had the audacity to save someone and then refused to be quietly grateful for being punished for it." Morrison's face reddened. "Ms. Martinez, your persecution complex is—" "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "You're going to listen to me now. For months, you've controlled this narrative. You've used your power to terrorize a single mother, to threaten a hospital, to intimidate healthcare workers across this state. But you made one critical mistake." The room was dead silent, everyone hanging on her words. "You assumed that destroying me would send a message to other healthcare workers to stay quiet and compliant. Instead, you've shown them exactly why they need to speak up. You've proven that the greatest threat to healthcare in this state isn't funding shortages or staffing crises, it's politicians who think they can control medical decisions through intimidation." Morrison attempted to regain control. "Ms. Martinez, your self-righteous speeches—" "I'm not finished." Sarah's voice cut through his interruption with surgical precision. "You want to talk about professional standards? Let's talk about them. Professional standards mean putting patient care above politics. Professional standards mean following medical ethics even when it's inconvenient for powerful people. Professional standards mean that when someone's heart stops beating, you save their life even if that person is actively working to destroy healthcare funding." She took a step closer to Morrison. "I saved Congressman Hayes' life because that's what nurses do. Not because I agreed with his politics. Not because I thought he deserved it more than anyone else. Not because I expected gratitude or recognition. I saved his life because in that moment he was a human being in cardiac arrest, and I had the skills to help him." The crowd was completely silent now, riveted by the confrontation. "But you couldn't accept that, could you, Governor? You couldn't accept that a Mexican-American nurse from a working-class family had saved the life of one of your political allies? You couldn't accept that she had done it better than anyone else could have. And you sure as hell couldn't accept that she refused to be quietly grateful when you tried to punish her for it." Morrison's face was now bright red, his political composure cracking. "That's enough." "No, it's not enough." Sarah's voice rose, carrying the anger and frustration of months of persecution. "You used the power of the governor's office to terrorize my 8-year-old daughter. You coordinated with federal agencies to intimidate my neighbors. You pressured this hospital to fire me for the crime of being too good at my job." She gestured to the packed room. "But look around you, Governor. Look at these faces. These are the healthcare workers you tried to intimidate into silence. These are the nurses and doctors and paramedics who save lives every single day without regard for politics or personal gain, and they're not afraid of you anymore." The crowd began to stand, a wave of scrubs and white coats rising in solidarity. "You've spent your career building power by dividing people, by making them afraid of each other, by convincing them that their neighbors are their enemies. But healthcare doesn't work that way. In the trauma bay, there are no Republicans or Democrats. There are only patients who need care and healthcare workers dedicated to providing it." Morrison finally lost his composure completely. "This is exactly the kind of self-righteous, politically motivated— The only person who made this political was you." Sarah's voice echoed through the room. "I saved a life. That's not political, that's human decency." The room erupted. 300 healthcare workers on their feet, applauding, cheering, some crying. Morrison stood frozen, realizing too late that his carefully orchestrated power play had backfired spectacularly. Chairman Sterling banged his gavel frantically. "Order! We need to restore order!" But there was no restoring order. The crowd was on its feet, chanting, "Sarah! Sarah! Sarah!" Morrison's state police escorts looked increasingly uncomfortable as the political winds shifted dramatically around their boss. Through the chaos, one voice cut through clearly. Congressman Hayes stood in the back of the room, having arrived quietly during the confrontation. The room fell silent as he walked forward. "Governor Morrison," Hayes said, his voice weak but clear, "I think you've said enough." Morrison spun around, clearly not expecting this intervention. "Bob, what are you doing here?" "I'm here," Hayes said slowly, "to correct the record." He looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez saved my life. Not just medically, she performed flawlessly under extreme pressure. but she also saved my political life by showing me what real integrity looks like. The room was dead silent now. Governor, you orchestrated a campaign of harassment and intimidation against a healthcare worker who did nothing but excel at her job. You used my name and my influence to justify unconscionable behavior. That ends tonight. Morrison stared at Hayes in shock. Bob, you can't be serious. I am deadly serious, Hayes replied. And I'm announcing tonight that I will be testifying in favor of Ms. Martinez in her federal civil rights case against your office. The crowd erupted again, but this time Morrison didn't wait for order to be restored. He pushed through the crowd toward the exit, his political instincts finally telling him that he had lost this battle completely. As the chaos settled, Chairman Sterling managed to regain control of the meeting. The vote to formally apologize to Sarah and offer her immediate reinstatement was unanimous. Even the board members who had previously supported her firing recognized which way the political winds were blowing. But Sarah politely declined the offer. Thank you, she said. But I have a new position at Johns Hopkins, and Arizona's loss will be Maryland's gain. As the meeting dispersed and the crowd began to file out, Sarah found herself surrounded by healthcare workers wanting to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her their own stories of standing up for patients, despite political pressure. Dr. Walsh appeared at her elbow. So how does it feel to win? Sarah looked around at the faces of nurses and doctors who had found their voices, at the broken political machine that had tried to destroy her, at the congressman who had finally found his conscience. It feels like the beginning, she said. The beginning of healthcare workers refusing to be silent. The beginning of institutions protecting their staff instead of sacrificing them. The beginning of putting medical ethics ahead of politics. As she and Emma drove away from St. Mary's Hospital for the last time, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. She had saved a life and nearly lost everything. But in the process, she had discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the right thing, and sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. The rearview mirror showed the hospital growing smaller behind them, but ahead lay Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, and a future where being an excellent nurse was celebrated rather than punished. Sarah Martinez had won more than a personal victory. She had struck a blow for every healthcare worker who had ever been told to stay quiet, to accept less, to put politics ahead of patients. And as the Arizona desert gave way to the promise of a new beginning, Sarah knew that her real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the cardiac ICU at Johns Hopkins Hospital, her hands steady as she adjusted the IV drip for a post-surgical patient. The familiar rhythm of monitors, the controlled chaos of critical care, the life and death decisions that defined her profession, all of it felt like coming home after a long exile. Dr. Martinez? The voice belonged to Maria Santos, one of the newest nursing graduates. Like many young nurses, Maria had been inspired by Sarah's story to pursue critical care nursing. The patient in bed 7 is asking for you specifically. Sarah smiled. After everything she had been through, being called doctor by mistake still amused her. I'm just a nurse, Maria. But thank you. The recognition had been overwhelming in the months since leaving Arizona. The American Nurses Association had given her their highest honor for professional courage. Time magazine had named her one of their People of the Year for standing up to political intimidation. Harvard Medical School had invited her to deliver their commencement address. But the real victory was much simpler. She was doing the work she loved, in an institution that valued excellence over politics, surrounded by colleagues who supported each other instead of tearing each other down. The federal civil rights case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that ensured Emma's college education and allowed Sarah to establish a legal defense fund for other healthcare workers facing political retaliation. More importantly, the settlement included a consent decree requiring Arizona to implement new policies protecting healthcare workers from governmental interference. Governor Morrison had resigned in disgrace 3 months earlier, facing federal corruption charges and the complete collapse of his political support. His Attorney General investigation into Sarah's credentials had been revealed as a sham, costing Arizona taxpayers over $2 million in legal fees and resulting in a scathing report from the state legislature. Congressman Hayes, true to his word, had testified in Sarah's federal case and had become an unlikely advocate for healthcare worker protection. His political transformation wasn't complete. He was still a conservative Republican with whom Sarah disagreed on many issues, but he had learned something important about the difference between political theater and actual governance. The most satisfying news had come just the week before. St. Plaint 1, Mary's Hospital had been forced to pay a multi-million-dollar settlement to the nurses' union for allowing political interference in employment decisions. Dr. Blackwell, true to his word, had donated a significant portion of his personal wealth to healthcare worker defense funds before taking a position at a small rural clinic where his political connections were less relevant than his medical skills. Sarah, Dr. Foster, the chief nursing officer, appeared at the nurses' station. "You have a visitor in the lobby, a young woman who says she's drove all the way from Phoenix to meet you." Sarah found the visitor in the hospital's main lobby, a nursing student, probably in her early 20s, wearing scrubs and looking nervous. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Jessica Chen. I'm a senior nursing student at Arizona State, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what, Jessica?" "For showing us that nursing is worth fighting for. That our professional ethics matter more than keeping politicians happy." Jessica's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I'm graduating next month, and I got accepted to the ICU training program at St. Mary's. A year ago, I would have been too scared to speak up if I saw something wrong. But your example taught me that sometimes staying quiet is the most dangerous thing you can do." It was conversations like this that made everything worthwhile. Not the national recognition or the legal victories, but the knowledge that other healthcare workers felt empowered to stand up for their patients and their profession. "Jessica, the real heroes are the nurses and doctors who do this work every day without recognition, who advocate for their patients even when no one is watching. I just happened to get caught on camera doing what any good nurse would do." "That's exactly why you're a hero," Jessica replied. "You did what any good nurse would do, and when they tried to destroy you for it, you fought back. You showed us that we don't have to accept being treated as disposable." That evening, Sarah and Emma sat in their Baltimore apartment, reading the latest news from Arizona. A new governor had signed legislation establishing the strongest healthcare worker protection laws in the country. The Sarah Martinez Healthcare Worker Protection Act made it a felony for government officials to retaliate against medical professionals for following their professional ethics. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from her homework, "do you ever miss Arizona?" Sarah considered the question. She missed the desert sunsets and her grandmother's cooking. She missed some of the colleagues who had supported her through the crisis. But she didn't miss the fear, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being under attack for doing her job. "I miss some things about Arizona," Sarah said finally. "But I think we're exactly where we need to be." Emma nodded and returned to her homework. At 9 years old, she was remarkably resilient, having weathered the storm of her mother's public persecution with grace and maturity that surprised everyone. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also taught her important lessons about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Walsh. "Saw the news about the new legislation. Your case changed everything. Thank you for not giving up." Similar messages arrived throughout the evening from colleagues across the country, all celebrating the legal and cultural victory that Sarah's case had achieved. Healthcare workers were organizing, speaking up, demanding better working conditions and protection from political interference. The movement had grown far beyond Sarah's individual case. Nurses were running for political office on platforms of healthcare worker protection. Medical schools were teaching courses on professional ethics in politicized environments. Hospital systems were implementing new policies to shield their staff from external pressure. But perhaps the most meaningful victory was the simplest one. Sarah was back to doing what she loved most, taking care of critically ill patients with skill, compassion, and the knowledge that her institution would support her professional judgment over political convenience. As she tucked Emma into bed that night, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, she had been a struggling single mother working too many hours for too little pay, trying to make ends meet while providing excellent patient care despite systemic obstacles. Now she was a symbol of resistance, a voice for healthcare workers everywhere, and living proof that sometimes doing the right thing no matter the cost can change the world for the better. "Mom?" Emma's sleepy voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yes, baby? I'm proud of you for saving that man's life, even though he was mean to you afterward." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "That's what we do, Em. We help people who need help, even when they don't appreciate it, even when it's hard. That's what makes us human." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the Baltimore skyline. Tomorrow, she would return to the ICU, where she would make life-and-death decisions based on medical science and professional ethics, rather than political calculations. She would train young nurses to follow their consciences and stand up for their patients. She would continue to be a voice for healthcare workers who needed protection from political interference. The price of compassion had been higher than she ever could have imagined. But the rewards, the knowledge that her stand had made the entire healthcare system stronger and more ethical made every moment of struggle worthwhile. Sarah Martinez had saved more than Congressman Hayes' life that night in the trauma bay. She had saved the idea that healthcare should be guided by medical ethics rather than political expedience. She had saved the principle that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is still worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the most important life she could have saved. Epilogue. 2 years later, Dr. Sarah Martinez, she had completed her doctorate in nursing practice, stood before a packed auditorium at the American Nurses Association annual conference. Her keynote address, "The Courage to Care, Healthcare Ethics in a Politicized World," had drawn the largest audience in the conference's history. The greatest threat to healthcare, she told the assembled nurses, is not funding shortages or staffing crises, though those are serious challenges. The greatest threat is the idea that our professional judgment should be subordinated to political convenience. She paused, looking out at hundreds of faces from every corner of American healthcare. 2 years ago, I was just a nurse doing my job. I saved someone's life and almost lost everything because I refused to be quietly grateful for being punished for it. But in trying to silence me, my persecutors accomplished the opposite. They gave voice to healthcare workers everywhere who had been told to stay quiet, to accept less, to put politics ahead of patients. The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. That evening, as Sarah flew back to Baltimore, she received a text from an unknown Arizona number. "Ms. Martinez, this is Officer Torres from Phoenix PD. I owe you an apology for how I treated you during that traffic stop. Your case made me examine my own actions and biases. I wanted you to know that I've completed sensitivity training and am now part of a police healthcare worker liaison program. Thank you for making all of us better. Danny Torres." Sarah smiled and showed the text to Emma, now 11 and already talking about following her mother into healthcare. "See, Mom," Emma said, "even the people who were mean to you learned something." "That's the power of standing up for what's right," Sarah replied. "Sometimes it changes more than just your own life." As their plane descended toward Baltimore, Sarah looked down at the city lights below and thought about all the hospitals, all the emergency rooms, all the ICUs where nurses were making split-second decisions to save lives without regard for politics or personal gain. The price of compassion would always be high, but as Sarah Martinez had proven, it was always worth paying.